Hello, friends, and welcome to Worldbuild with us, the podcast where we create fantastical worlds with help from you, our listeners. My name is Rob Hilferty, and I'm here with my co-hosts Daniel Quinn and Courtney Staples. On today's episode, we are finishing off our lovely patron, Commissar Whiskers' foray into the next generation. Not that one, and no, not even that one. But it's as I always say, you really need to go back and listen to the first episode because otherwise, oh boy, you're just going to be real lost. A big shout out again to Commissar Whiskers for that setting. And before we get into anything else, we have two brand new patrons that I would love to shout out. So a huge thank you to Carson and Alexander, both of them coming in at the Goblin tier. Thank you guys so much for giving us money to do the podcast. Like, wild. I'm continually stunned that people gave us money for the podcast in the best way possible. With that out of the way, this is a great segue to remind everyone that if you want us to build your world, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com. where if you click on the link, follow the instructions, within a reasonable amount of time, we'll be building your world. If you want to follow us on social media, we are going to be at Let's Worldbuild on Twitter. If you want to come join our Discord and chat about, any TNG, whether it be Star Trek or there's definitely some lesser ones, you can do so by following a link in the description to our Discord. Come chat with us about this world building or hell, any old thing. And of course, like Carson and Alexander, if you're feeling particularly generous or you just want access to those sweet, sweet patron-only episodes, you can go to our Patreon and give us money there. Now, with all of the shilling out of the way, the last we left off, we had a twist, and that twist was when a gift becomes a curse. So, Daniel, why don't you start us off today and tell us how you want to reconcile our twist?
I mean, I think the answer also, I just think more interesting, is already in where we were going. I think we concluded with the idea of like a child being born and this is going to change things because it deviates from their cloning. And I thought the gift for them is their survival from a previous iteration of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that they have been human beings have given themselves up to the sea to create, essentially a means for these humans to survive. So I think if the gift of this new child, or if this new child is born, that gift gets corrupted because their society will be upended and they won't know what to deal with that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Essentially, the way that they reproduce will be totally changed, and I think that will frighten them and then create discord among them.
Okay, so we're talking about the Children of Men style new generation, the new generation that we had kind of come up with previously, correct?
Yeah, so like the humans who have to clone themselves basically to survive.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
And we had talked last time too about how this might be like why this new generation is trying to seek out the knowledge of the former one, and like maybe it's like unearthing secrets that the previous generation had wanted to keep hidden, like sort of opening Pandora's box and letting out all of the stuff that they were trying to heal over, essentially.
I want to segue into my tenet real quick because it does match Daniel's fairly well. Although I think I added some level of specificity as well as some level of vagueness that I think should help us a little bit, or at least an element to it. Because I was thinking similarly to Daniel, but on a more global or a vaster scale, I suppose. I was thinking that this next generation has a hard time limit. Like there is something, whether it be like unstable DNA or unstable genetic code, or maybe the previous generation could only get them so far, but there is something that is that will definitive. There is a timeline that this new generation can fix and probably will spend some level of time doing. But that is something that I'm really interested in seeing is each subsequent like person is slightly off compared to the last one, or not worse, because I feel like that is involving all sorts of weird eugenic-y shit, but like perhaps less adaptable to the new environment than the previous generation or something like that. I kind of left it vague because I want to hear what y'all think about what I'm talking about here.
That's kind of an interesting idea, what you said about like less adaptable. Like the longer this goes on, the more locked in their traits become. And I feel like one of the key traits of humanity itself is how adaptable we are to like any sort of situation. So if you take that away, you really remove how much we can like actually survive.
I love that because it will connect narratively with what we've set up so far. Like, if there's a time limit on whatever the previous humans have done for us, then it connects to the fact that they're surviving by basically genetic engineering, and B, it makes that child really important because, or whatever has been born, because they might be the answer to that.
That's kind of what I was thinking as well, is that like in the moment, this kind of unnatural natural birth is really shocking and like surprising to the people, and that's why it's causing this strife and conflict and everything. But maybe that's like the actual way that they kind of shake from this frame that they're stuck in, this kind of deteriorating situation. You know, like maybe it's like, maybe this is the way out. Maybe this is not like a baby savior, but like they're the key to a successful diversion or successful adaptation for future generations.
Yeah, like the next stage of evolution, essentially.
I really didn't want to use that because that is some fucking, oh boy, there is
I know.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't think sci-fi should shy away from what it would mean, because those things are going to happen in our future. We're already doing forms of genetic engineering with humans right now, so it's like we have to confront them, you know?
Right. No. It's mostly just the verbiage that I have an issue with more than anything else. But anyway, yeah. No, I think I keep going back to Gattaca, but it's such a good movie, and it's like kind of apt for what we're talking about here, I think, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Well, Courtney, why don't you tell us where you're going with our twist, and then we can figure that out.
So I definitely went in a different direction, more broader, more environmental. Mine was
then the pain demons came.
The robots came and tortured everybody. No,
that legit. I'm like honestly like half expecting that from you, Courtney, but you know, we'll see. Sorry, okay, more environmental, more Kevin Costner in Waterworld. Okay,
pretty much.
What do we got?
So the previous generation had kind of sacrificed themselves to benefit the next one, but in leaving them this like rejuvenated Earth with these underwater seed pods, they hadn't foreseen the consequence of those seed pods as potentially a very tempting food source for creatures that were previously relegated to depths of the ocean. So basically, we've got giant squids and stuff like that,
and like literal bait. Oh my god! Human embryo or new human embryos as like bait for the Cthulhuid sea monster. Oh
pretty
my
much,
god!
Pretty much.
That is so fucking ridiculous, and that I kind of love it a whole lot.
Thank you.
Actually,
thank you.
No, and then what's cool is like it doesn't really violate stuff like kind of our solarpunk pseudo utopian ideas, because they're not evil. They're just they are what they are.
Yeah.
You know? It'll just be like a big shark or squid or something, and it's not like they're constantly there. It's probably they just come up when they need to eat, and then they go back down for however long. And
Courtney, we're not just going to make it a dumb fucking squid or shark. Like, if we get to fuck around with deep sea monsters from like the far future of Earth, like, we're definitely going to do better than a squid or a shark type thing. Like, we're a world building podcast, Courtney. We can't, I don't think anyone would sit here and be like, wow, they're so fucking creative. They came up with a squid and a shark. Like, no, come on. We got to do better than that.
Well, for now, that's what they are.
For now.
Yeah.
But like, I just want to throw out my disapproval for basic bitch shark. Like, I feel like if we just come away with Sharknado, like we've failed. So I just want to toss that out there for the time B.
Sharknado.
I just wanted to clarify.
Can we just okay, this is a favorite of yours, Courtney. Why don't we just add a screaming bear person into the sharks?
Yes, turn it into Annihilation.
Annihilation on the bingo card, everyone.
That's a horror direction, though.
Yeah.
Oh,
another way to take it would be street shark human hybrids. So we got the actual street sharks going on.
So actually that's kind of where I was going, where like if there's like genetic pods drifting in the ocean, like genetic runoff is absolutely going to be a weirdo thing. So it's not going to be like street sharks. It's going to be like street sharks, but like Cthulhuid, basically, right? Like
horrifying.
Instead of Killer Mari, that's the Squid Man, it's got to be something that's like genuinely horrifying. I don't know what it is. You know what? What, listeners? Why don't you provide us with your best and most terrifying deep sea monsters that we can like blend in some horrifying way? Please. With humans. I don't know if AI art is good enough to get that prompt, but maybe it can. So if you want to send us some pictures along with it, that would be jawsome. Okay, I just want to toss it out there. All right, let's talk a little bit more about the reconciliation of the twist. We've got some really strong hooks going on here. Do we want to try and reconcile Courtney's weird street shark folks with Daniel and I's kind of more coherent thread? Or is it something that like we're just going to have to accept that they're two separate things?
I mean, I have a question about we have to really decide what the tone is for those things. Like, do they represent something menacing, or do they represent something misunderstood and potentially like neutral or good?
Oh,
like, how do they fit in narratively?
Daniel, I'm so glad you're here, keeping me on track, because like this is just so. I'm glad that you have the laser focus that I absolutely lack right now with my brain leaking through my fucking ears. So that's great. That's an excellent question. Are we going to get to the bottom of the ocean and turn these shark men around and there's like a Phantom of the Opera mask on them? Like, what they're just misunderstood romantics, of course. It was like that the whole time.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I mean, they can be like, straight up, they could be regular animals. I'm just asking like, if we don't want to do anything like extravagant with them conceptually, but how does the setting feel about their presence? Is it a bad thing or a good thing is what I'm asking.
I could see it being mixed, and I think in the original prompt itself it even talked about like there is no one like universal kind of government or society, so maybe it's similar with these creatures. Like some of them are more menacing than others are kind of gentle giants of the sea sorts of things. Like maybe it just depends on where you're at in the ocean.
I could even see some conspiracy theorists within this world conceiving of these, sea beasts as, they must have been the previous generation, like obviously falsely, but like trying to study them, and then of course with Daniel's tenet from the previous episode of desperately trying to understand and like get to them, like there's entire like factions of folks who are not my faction, by the way, but I just want to toss it out there, that are like ultra deep sea divers or something like that. And they're trying to like, they think that they're trying to reconnect to their ancestral roots because they think that they're shark men or something,
Yeah. I like that a lot. And I mean, it makes sense. Like if you're, on an island or on some like raft station type thing, and you see these massive creatures come up and like interact in some way with these seed pods and then dive back down, like it would be safe to assume like, are they like collecting these for their own purposes to continue their own species or what have you?
Yeah, especially if like the genetic runoff that they're kind of absorbing is maybe like a very basic level of consciousness. And I don't mean like that they're self-aware, but maybe it's like they're aware of what like empathy, or like they have some kind of connection to humans or the new humans, that they're like, oh yeah, I'm not afraid of these things, nor do I think that they're food necessarily, but I'm going to eat those pods for sure.
Yeah. So we got telepathic street sharks. Gotcha.
They're not necessarily telepathic. Okay.
I know.
They're like psychic adjacent street shark men, maybe. Again, I'm still waiting for the new kind of like AI directed art that we're going to get from our listeners. Send that our way for sure. I think that all kind of vibes together, though. I think that's working, though.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Well, again, Daniel, I don't want to push it aside. Thank you for pushing this in this direction. I think that was a very smart thing that I just barreled right over. So
it seems like our conclusion is that they're a neutral device, but factions in the world view them as various things based on their own interpretations.
Yeah. Cool. Which seems like a fairly good and decent way to kind of approach world building in general. How do different people view different things? I watch a video series, a video created by Ryan Hollinger, and he just did a double feature of Anaconda and Lake Placid. And I just kind of had this on my mind where it's like,
oh God.
Yeah. It's like giant, dumb CGI monsters from the late 90s, and Betty White.
Excellent.
Yes, of course. But I think we've satisfied the reconciliation with the twist well enough where we can move into our factions. I talked about factions previously, which meant it would have been a better segue than what I'm dealing with now. But who am I? You're right. A miserable little pile of secrets, right? Just a man. So Courtney, why don't you hit us with your faction? Tell us what your street sharks are like, and we can kind of go from there.
Unfortunately, they're not street sharks, which I'm regretting now, definitely. But they do have to do with diving. So my faction is one of midwives who are responsible for diving into the ocean to harvest the seedling humans.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not so sure like how technologically advanced the societies on this planet are at this point. So I wanted this particular group to be akin to, I think it's the Bajau people of Southeast Asia, who are a nomadic group who spend a ton of time in and underwater. And some of their divers can hold their breath underwater for 13 minutes, which is nuts to think about.
Yeah.
And these midwives would be the ones diving under to look for the seed pods with the desired traits, like we had talked about last time, and like carefully removing those pods, delivering them up to the surface, and initially caring for the babies. Or I think we'd also discussed that maybe these beings are born more or less fully grown, so that could work too. And maybe they're just like referred to as babies until their bodies and minds adjust to being like actually conscious.
Yeah, they're certainly more mature than what we're used to with like the mewling, like drool and shit factories that are our current babies. I mean, no offense to babies.
Yeah.
And of course, if babies are listening, you don't know what the fuck I'm talking about anyway. But also, like, we need the views, so why not? But no. I think that absolutely works for me, and that is rather interesting. Like to have that aspect of the life cycle kind of fleshed out a little bit more. And I almost went with a midwife myself, and I'm glad that I didn't. But I do love this idea that they're like, I mean, they're diving in, they're grabbing these like synthetic like plant pods that are full of possibility, and then bring them back up. That's a really fun, cool way that you're now I have a question about that, of course. So when they're diving, does that mean that they're picking and choosing the pod to be born? Or is it like, oh, this one's ripe, I got to bring it up? Or is it a matter of they can choose whatever they want, and then they get the choice, right?
I think it's like they get the choice. Like they're selecting the ones that maybe are, whether it's like the strongest or the fastest looking, or display some sort of trait that they want to hone in on for whatever reason, and bringing those up in particular. Or it could also be like, furthest along in development. But I imagine there's also definitely like a trait selection at play.
So these midwives have a lot of power, is what I'm hearing. Like they basically choose the direction that their generation essentially moves in, or the next generation goes in.
I would say so. Yeah.
What sort of styling do you envision for them? So like when you say diving into the ocean, it makes me think of things like Greek mythology, and it makes me think of potentially fairy tales. So how do you like visualize them, since they're doing this really unusual physical act?
I picture them as like visually kind of like rugged and minimalist, like they're diving down with the bare minimum of gear so they don't get weighed down. But at the same time, I could see them bringing air canisters or something of that sort with them, not to breathe, but to like use to inflate balloons to help bring the pods back to the surface.
That's cool. Yeah.
So more like Waterworld-esque.
Yeah,
like,
it is. It is very
minimal
Waterworld.
tech,
I know.
right? As opposed to
I'm
fantastic.
just going
Courtney.
full on into the Waterworld here.
Just checking.
Okay. I tend to think visually here, and I'm trying to think of them. So these, the new humans, they're also like part plant in a lot of ways, right? So when
Are they?
Yeah. I mean,
I don't know. I don't think we ever decided.
I thought it was the old generation that was fully plant, and the new ones are like basically humans.
Mm-hmm.
I had that exactly opposite in my head.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Huh.
I swear that I even swear that we took the time last episode to be like, okay, just so we're clear.
I thought we established that the creatures in the ocean are fully plants, and the humans on the land are basically humans.
Yeah, and that's why they can't recognize.
No, okay, so yeah. Okay, we are in agreement. Okay. Yeah. But they're also like they're plants, but they're humanoid shaped plants, right?
Genetically,
like,
yeah.
Right. Okay. So in my head, I'm thinking of this like, you know, when you say midwife, again, female connotation right there. But like, you know how there are like sea hags that have the long hair that has like kelp and seaweed tangled in it. But instead of that, like just their hair is literally seaweed. You know,
that's cool.
And their ability to breathe and it's not just 13 minutes, it's probably closer to like half an hour to an hour.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Means that they're diving super deep into this kind of ocean to find the genetic pods and stuff like that. And again, it's because they're able to breathe better because they're literally fucking seaweed or like partially seaweed, right? So like that to me, I think makes a lot of sense. And we can definitely make that work and happen for us, you know.
They've inherited some genetic material from their plant origins that makes them different.
Exactly.
Differently human.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Better for adaptation, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And then we can skip over the gills aspect of Waterworld completely.
Thank you. Yes, of course. You know, we can skip over most aspects from Waterworld and still be good.
Yeah.
I forgot. I don't remember them having guilds. Wow.
Well, no,
it was
only
just Kevin Costner did.
That's why he was special.
Oh, he only did.
Yeah.
Oh,
because he was a mutant. Yeah.
Which is like it doesn't even make sense. Like, I don't have time to go into Waterworld here. But let's, okay. Daniel, please drag us away from Waterworld discourse and like into your faction, if you would, sir.
One of the reasons why I wanted to get a sense of style, like knowing like the world is kind of like low tech survival-esque. Is that fair to say? Like not in a negative way, but just like minimalist, like you said. I was thinking of a group of them who have broken off, who are intensely focused on trying to breed naturally and to going back to their origins, so to speak. And I came to mind was the Scientology Sea Org. And so this group lives on vessels in the ocean all the time. And now that I know that there are water diving moms, they kidnap some of those moms because what they're trying to do is they're trying to, and now that I know that there's shark creatures in the water that are genetically mutated, they capture those things as well as the moms, and they perform experiments, not like in a grotesque way.
It sounds kind of grotesque.
Yeah, a little bit.
Like, but in a way to understand like what's going on genetically, and also that they stylistically they're different than the people on the earth, on the land. They're more formal, I would say, and I would say like more clean room-esque than say the kind of dirty Waterworld people on the ground.
Okay, I can't help but think of this as a comedic premise where it's like there's like a plant guy and he's got like a giant tank with a midwife and a shark creature, and he's like gets on a fucking microphone. And he's like, shark creature, have sex with that sea woman. And like, they're just floating in the tank and nothing's happening. It's like, it's a farce. It's a complete farce. But like, that's where my brain goes. And my brain is poisoned. So please, Daniel, continue on with your very serious reading of this. I'm genuinely interested, but I needed to get that poison out of my brain before I could continue on.
So I'm thinking in terms of like their vessel, it might have aspects of whatever naturalist styling that the Waterworld people have, but their vessel is also more machine-like, I would think. And you know, like they have uniforms maybe, and they're more methodical. So I'm thinking also maybe they steal genetic material. So like the mothers that come up, they probably steal the ones they've selected so they can perform these experiments.
Okay. Instead of them having a uniform, can they have a more uniform genetic code? So they like look similar because they have designed themselves to look more similar.
Oh, I like that. So they're kind of like physically the same. So unlike the Waterworld people who are from the same pool, they're all clones of each other. I think that would be better. Like literal clones.
I think that'd be kind of fun and cool as well. Like,
and they dress the same.
Right. Or rather like they just have the same genetic makeup or they I'm just repeating myself at this point.
Yeah. What if they like had sort of uprooted the plant thing that was kind of giving their group life, and it's now like a part of their ship, or it's like underneath their ship, and they continuously harvest from that for new life.
That is
clones.
Genuinely horrifying.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to, like, they're trying to understand the origins, and if they dilute their own stock, it will pull them away from understanding that generation after generation.
Interesting. There's also this kind of like mentality to them that I kind of appreciate or respect, which is like, you know what, we're going to uproot this thing because it doesn't define us. We're so committed to natural birth that we're going to reject that entirely, you know, which may be a reason why they're like kidnapping or experimenting on the midwives to begin with, because they can't naturally reproduce yet. And so like they need to steal babies from other communities or something like that, you know?
Well, that would make sense, because if they're all clones, then in order to test the genetic origins, they actually need a pool that's not theirs.
Right.
So that's probably why they probably kidnapped the mom. I doubt they perform spec tests on the mom. I think they kidnap the mom and take the egg she selected and test that. Maybe they give it back to her and then put her back in the ocean. Maybe she doesn't know about this, but the whole idea is that they need to test the actual pool.
The fact that they're pirates that no one knows about, or like science pirates that no one knows about, essentially is quite interesting. Actually, I love the idea that like it's essentially a catch and release program where it's like, oh, I don't know what happened, but the pod I was choosing is gone. You know, like that's kind of a cool like myth, or even like folklore-ish type story. It's like, oh, the tale of the midwife who lost her pod or something like that. Like that's kind of a fun way to do it as well.
I mean, maybe if they don't want their existence to be known, they might not steal the orb. They might test it and give it back without her knowing. You know, so she maybe has some memory lapse that she doesn't know about or can't account for in the ocean. And that's the time.
Yeah, like attributes it to like coming up to surface too fast or something like that.
Yeah. I was also getting like Fire in the Sky vibes as well, you know, like something where they don't know what the experimentation that they're doing is, but it's like because like to them, this experiment is so advanced that they don't recognize what it is or something like that. So it's like a UFO phenomenon or UAP phenomenon, but that is just like, they cannot explain it because it's so out of what they're used to, you know?
What's UAP?
That's what UFOs are called now. Yeah, it's not as good. I still think UFOs just sounds better. Yeah. It's unidentified aerial phenomenon, by the way. I wanted to toss that out. Yeah, it's the same thing, but UFO is so ubiquitous and like everyone knows what it is. So
you can't change it at this point.
No, you can. They did. They literally did when they declassified a bunch of stuff and like we're like, yeah, UAPs are real, and it's like, yeah, but not in the way. Anyway, I'm getting way off track here. Let's move on to my faction. And here's the thing. I'm far more interested in the theme that I've created for this particular faction than I am with the faction themselves. I have something for them. I want to talk through my thought process, and I want to get your input about this before like really solidify stuff. I was going through like the conflicts that we have and how we can manifest these conflicts, how we make these conflicts real. And one theme that I was really interested in is this idea that we have, which is like we have the old generation and the new generation, and this idea that it's the self versus the past, right? In the self, and we take that on like on a human level. There is essentially conflict between us and our past. And I find that to be really fascinating. And I'm trying to figure out a way to manifest that and make that more physical, more real, more whatever. And the best that I could come up with is what are essentially editors. They are a mix between geneticists and psychologists. And we talked about last episode how when you create a new life, when you're cloning, you do as a parent have some kind of like say in what you want, right? Like, I want them to have my best traits, but how do you figure out what your best traits are? And so these editors, these weird like geneti-psychologists will root out what you perceive to be the bad traits are and tamper with them in some way, right? So they are the folks who are in charge of like manipulating the gene pool and kind of combining the gene pool. And I'm not sure how to make it more real and how I want it to play with a conflict between ourselves and our history. And I was wondering if you could elucidate or help me figure out what I'm trying to do here.
I gotta bring up Octavia Butler.
God damn it, Courtney.
I know. In her Xenogenesis Lilith's Brood trilogy, it's about like an alien race that comes to Earth and sort of saves the last remnants of humanity from nuclear annihilation. And part of what makes them so bizarre and alien is that they pick and choose traits from other species to just like meld into themselves.
Okay.
And it's sort of interesting because they have a different way of looking at it. Like they don't see cancer as necessarily a negative thing because it's like a infinite growth potential basically to them.
Interesting.
If I'm remembering correctly. And Octavia Butler is always so good at like just making aliens very alien. And with this, it brings up a lot of questions of like, what is humanity still? Like, how much can you change and still be human? And what are you willing to do to continue surviving as a human, and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of like weird gene splicing and combinations and giving up traits that you thought were beneficial and that sort of thing.
Very interesting.
I don't know, Danny, if you can explain more since you've read, I think, the first one.
Yeah, I think one of the things that struck me is their ships are biological entities that can shapeshift essentially and incorporate genetic material. But as you were talking about that, it makes me think to Rob's point about conflict between future and past ideology is like perhaps the conflict is that in the present you have these editors who are changing humans, right, to selecting the best bits or the best bits that suit you, I guess. And I think the tension there, which is what you were speaking to in terms of like what makes a human is you start to edit out essentially the process of evolution itself in a sense. And so if the past is about, I guess they force themselves to evolve in a sense, then change into some other form. So I don't know if maybe the ideas that we embed in the humans of the past is a willingness to be subject to the environment, right? Which is essentially what they did. They made themselves subject to the environment. Whereas these humans in the future, if there's editors, they're now not letting the environment dictate what they are. And so as we're changing ourselves, and that may be to our detriment because we're not adapting to anything. We're like, especially since you said psychology is a factor in how they do the editing, then it's like we're almost editing ourselves to our own whims. And that doesn't take into account the stresses and needs of the environment, which could weaken us over time.
Interesting.
And maybe that's kind of where my reconciliation with a gift becomes a curse kind of comes into play, where there's a hard limit, and this hard limit is actually self-imposed. And so that conflict is no longer like, oh, we need to find a cure for this super disease before our species dies. Maybe it's like, we need to shift our cultural thinking about how we approach our genes and our ability to adapt and stuff like that.
Right. Because like they may not realize that they're creating a time limit for themselves by doing this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, in a way, it almost feels like they're trying to revert themselves back to the previous generation without even knowing it, which makes them far less adaptable.
Right. Like they're creating they're creating the limitations that I guess we faced. Like, I can imagine a past for these plant humans, which would be us, right?
Right.
That's not part of the setting, but that could be extrapolated. So, for example, if past plant humans who are now basically extinct, they're in the ocean, but they're extinct as far as we understand previous humans, maybe what led to their downfall is an increased reliance on digitization. Their society became so reliant on, I don't know, technology, which is a tired kind of trope, that they no longer had to worry about the environment killing them. And it did kill them. And that's how they solved everything, is by they upended themselves and finally fixed things. But like, maybe that was their decline and we don't know that. And the current humans don't know that.
I'm also reminded of like how we create monocultures, because like in food, right? We will create a monoculture of like a banana, say, which is, it yields the highest fruit. It is like the best commercially, but it makes that particular strain ridiculously weak to like a virus, right?
Yeah.
And if we did that like with humans, like if we lack the ability to adapt to like any kind of outside force or some kind of like virus or something like that, I don't want to do plague and I don't want to do pandemic, because I feel like that's often like a fairly tired trope of like apocalypse shit. But I feel like that might actually kind of work. Like we just kind of muddled with our genes to the point where we've created a genetic monoculture of some kinds, Interesting. What I do kind of find interesting as well is this idea that we're creating one of my favorite themes, and I'm sure it's a fucking square on my bingo card, is like this theme of recursion or cycles. But in this case, it's like, it's literally the past repeating itself, and that works out for me as well with this kind of idea that the self versus their history, the self versus the past, is kind of interesting to me as well in that way.
Yeah, I think that wraps it up. That wraps up that part of it.
I think so. We're going to call it, I think, because I think I think if we were to continue this conversation, it gets like real dark and depressing, and that's not the theme that we're going with.
Yeah.
So I think that's it for the factions, right? Courtney, you went.
All
right. You got your midwives. Daniel, you got your submarine scientists who are stealing people's babies. And I've got my weird editor folks. So yeah, that all makes sense. So with all the factions wrapped up, we can roll into our main quest line here. Guys, what's the through line with this? We have to involve all of our factions, but what's the through line? What's the narrative that we're kind of seeing here? What's the quest for our PCs on this adventure?
I think something has to do with a child.
I agree. I think we should bring that child back. Yeah.
Yeah.
The danger, of course, is we need to avoid children of men as a plot.
Yeah. Oh, I do want to make this. I want to bring this back, Daniel. I really want to make sure that the child that's born that is like a wonder to this world is like is demonstrably not from the faction who are desperately trying to learn how to naturally reproduce. Because I love the idea that just like stuck in their craw, they're really bitter about it too.
Yeah, but I think they should be connected in some way.
Oh, of course. But I want it to be like, maybe it's like this was an exile or someone who like they cast away, and then this person just so happen to have the next generation or the first natural birth or something like that. I think that'd be kind of interesting because they cast off that kind of wish fulfillment and thought process, and like they rejected it only to then stumble dick or vagina first into having a natural birth on their own, you know?
I like that. I would say that I think that because the sea people are actually doing research, though, it might be the case that they were able to predict where such a birth would happen. Because if they can be an adversary to this group, then even though they don't understand how it happened, maybe because they've been kidnapping eggs from that group,
Right.
so maybe they were able to at least predict the region, and they maybe that the only time they come onto the earth is because they realize, oh, it's happening, and they're after this person.
Oh, so they're kind of like the main villain of the scenario,
Maybe.
like trying to hunt this group down so that they can do more research and figure out why it happened.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they don't even have nefarious intent for the child, but the fact that they're hunting someone is nefarious, you know?
Yeah.
The idea that there is just a slightly menacing faction, and again, there's no war here. I want to emphasize that from the previous episode. It's not like they're blowing limbs off and like eviscerating folks, Courtney. But
okay.
you know, I love this idea. I mean, and to them, I'm sure that there are worse things than like physical violence in this world, and that's kind of like this idea that they're intimidating and looming, and they're menacing in all sorts of interesting ways that aren't physically violent, you know. So how do we make that part of the quest line? I see them more as just a kind of general baddie or general antagonist here. I want them to be a part of the solution. I want them to be able to be a part of some kind of, like, you need them in order to complete this quest or finish the through line. How do we make that happen?
I wonder if it has something to do with the sort of tree of life that they had uprooted from their part of the ocean that they were kind of pulling from, if that plays a role in some way.
Could the child be dying or something? Or maybe something bad is happening, could happen to it, and the tree is a solution.
So like it needs like medical assistance or something that only they can provide.
Yeah, and this is the kind of weakness that they've been like genetically breeding out. It's like, oh no, this child is sick, and it's like, we told you this would happen, like that kind of thing. But you just need to get over this like one hump, and then like the tree is, or the uprooted tree is kind of the key to that. Is that what we're suggesting?
Well, if at the heart of this, there's a tension between the old and new, and the old ways thinking might be subject to destruction in a whim, but over the long term is the key to survival, and the new way is stable in the short term, but leads to your destruction in the long term.
Right.
Then these two ends of the spectrum have to represent one. So the child, I think, represents the past and growing through nature kind of affecting you and changing you, and you survive that way. And it seems like the adversary guys in the boats represent nurture to the extreme.
Yes.
So again, I think the tree they've upended that they're cloning themselves out of is also representing the past. So maybe there's something they can offer, and maybe they don't realize that the tree is part of that solution. So bringing the two together, because I think on their own, both are smart extremes. You know, like it's got to come together.
No, I think that you've analyzed the kind of thematic components remarkably well here, and I think that's really apt for what we're trying to do. So kudos, sir.
Just working with the stuff you put on the table.
How do we make it fit though?
Well, we want to play with the child dying, right? So, or maybe I don't know if it has to be that literal, but
well, we want that. Well, I suppose the question is, right? Do we want this child to be the savior, whether in life or death? Or do we want this conflict and the resolution to represent something greater than that? You know, I am one to suggest that this is not a savior child, but the moments and the circumstances surrounding this child are the thing that move the society towards the thing that will restore them and reconcile perhaps both of the past and the future, and present and all that fucking nonsense together, you know?
Okay, taking what you just said, here's an idea. It's not that the child themselves is dying, or that the child themselves is the one that has some magical gift, because we want to avoid the whole Harry Potter trope, which I
Of
totally
course.
get.
Which is
It's
way
that,
more ancient than Harry Potter, but I yes.
well, it's what we owe a tribute to Harry Potter.
Yes, of course.
So,
yes.
So what if the society that we add an element that the land-bound society, they're experiencing some sort of deterioration or harm lately. The child is born, which is regarded as a miracle, but something unusual for them. And it's not, and taking the child to the sea people is a matter of, if the sea people can implant in this particular child's genetic material, this combination of their tree and the research they've been doing, that can then be reintroduced back into the population through the child. And that will save them throughout the generations.
Yeah.
Okay.
Something else to bring up too is the fact that, like, we established that the seedling pod people, like, they come out as more grown up than we would think. Like, they're probably teenagers or adolescents or even young adult, like full adults or something.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, this child is like a literal baby. And if nobody on Earth has any experience dealing with a literal baby, they're going to be like, oh, fuck, what do we even do with this? Like,
so the story centers on the mother then.
Yeah.
So it's a mother. Like, is it a diver mother who's carrying a baby that she gave birth to?
Actually, I do like the idea that the midwife is the one who would give birth. I think that's like thematically kind of interesting as well.
Yeah.
That's kind of neat. And then,
right?
I mean, I don't know if it needs to literally be that you have to inject the child with genetic material for this to work, but like, I feel like the child or that pairing is a carrier for the solution.
Yes, exactly. It's kind of like when we see genetic mutations that are really rare and unique, but they benefit mankind long term. I'm thinking like Henrietta Lacks, for example, right? With her immortal cells and stuff like that. So like, this child is the Henrietta Lacks plus of this particular generation, right? And I like the idea that what this mother and the child needs are actually your intimidating sea scientist faction, but maybe because of their reputation or maybe because of their kind of menacing aura, the mother is actively trying to avoid them, and rather she should be running in the opposite direction. And in that way, the conflict is also a cultural one, which is like, maybe you shouldn't be so fucking xenophobic, or maybe you shouldn't be so wary of like these outsiders or something like that. That kind of messaging might be kind of interesting to deal with here as well. And it also, I think, lives up to some of the more kinder thematic components within hope punk. What's the one that we're doing?
Solarpunk.
Solarpunk. Thank you. Oh my God, my brain, you guys, I'm telling you. But it works with the greater thematic components of Solarpunk that we're kind of flirting with here as well.
The clones might be scary, just like physically. They might be clones of each other, but they also be like less human looking, and that's part of their scariness factor, to your point.
That's kind of interesting as well. Yeah.
Maybe they communicate in a strange way.
Could they also just be like of the previous generation, like literally?
Like some like surviving remnants of them.
Yeah, or like, because we were talking about this idea that the new generation is seeking out the old generation, but maybe this old generation is that might be an interesting way to do it. Like the old Earth, the old humans are part of this new solution just as before, or are we kind of taking agency away from the new generation as well? There's something there that I like, and there's something there that I don't. So what do you guys think?
No, I'm fine bringing in some members of the old one, because we had talked last episode too about like maybe there are a couple pockets here and there of people who hadn't made that sacrifice and who are now like much older, possibly regretting their choices. And
and this is their second chance at sacrificing themselves, or sacrificing an aspect of themselves for the future generations to come.
As long as they're not literally the same people who existed in the previous generation. right? Because if they did, all of the mystery is gone because they actually exist. They know exactly what happened. So if there's some
Yeah, I
variation of
gotcha.
that,
Yeah.
I'd be down with it. So like, for example, maybe there's a remnant of memory kept in the tree, right? That these genetic people have access to, which I know defies
of
our
your
understanding of
tree.
science. Yeah, of the urge of their
Yeah.
tree kind of thing.
Mhm.
That would totally color their like their ideals and methodology. Like, of course they're looking for a natural birth because they had someone from the older generation being like, well, this is how it always was and this is how it
Right.
should be.
Mhm.
Yeah,
You could add a mystical element too, where they converse with the tree in some way, even though
absolutely.
it's uprooted, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. That totally works. This is all working really well for me, and I hate to be a selfish fuck here, but where does my faction fit in with this exactly?
Right.
I know. You gotta throw in the twist, baby. You gotta fuck them up.
What would you say is the most important aspect of your faction?
I as I stated up top when I introduced them, I think that the thematic components are really most interesting and most important to me.
So thematically, it's like a less about adaptation, more about direct choice and like conscious choice as opposed to natural evolution in a way.
Because these are the editors, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So, are they the real adversaries?
That's what I was just thinking.
There
Yeah.
we go. Hell yeah. Okay. Just a simple question. All of a sudden, I've got a half chub. It's perfect. Absolutely.
Yeah.
They strike me as something that right now would make me more like I'm more uncomfortable with a psychologist / genetic engineer than I am with a genetic engineer in the vacuum.
Right?
Because like if I have a genetic engineer, right, who's looking at, say, I'm going to edit the human genome to remove this list of diseases based on mortality rates, right? That's very different than sitting down with someone who says, oh, you seem to have unresolved trauma with your parents. Let's remove this gene that will make you not feel that way and your children not feel that way.
Yeah.
That's like not really based on science. And that's what I think is scary about it.
Yeah. Even to a certain extent, it could be like, I notice here that you said you want your offspring to be not sad anymore. Okay,
Yes.
no problem. And then you remove that, like, that is, you're absolutely right. That is absolutely way more terrifying than someone fucking around and mucking around in the gene pool.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm totally cool with them, representing the kind of uber status quo and like taking that kind of villainous role. I did not intend for them to be that, but I love this direction for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe even a part that they're interested in removing, especially with this new child that's been born, is that like intense like parental bond there.
Oh, yeah.
Where they view it as like this should be more of a communal thing. This should be like everybody should be able to draw from this child, essentially. It shouldn't just be your child.
Yeah.
I love the idea that to the editors, this is just it is just a thing that should not exist. Top to bottom, psychologically, physically, like they look at it and they see an error in the code that must be deleted. Like that's kind of how I'm viewing their kind of perspective about this. And that to me is really fascinating and even more terrifying than the whole other thing,
Or not even necessarily like an error that needs to be deleted, but it's like, oh, this is like an aberration. Like, how can we use that for everybody else? And sort of ignoring like the mother's wishes, ignoring any sort of like individuality that the child might have. Like, just basically saying like, we need this to develop further and to study further.
Gotcha. So like to the mother, this child represents infinite possibilities, but to the editors, it's like this represents infinite chaos or infinite disaster in some ways, right? It's kind of like seeing
something to like mold instead of to like allow to flourish, basically.
Right.
To continue with the imagery that we had last episode, more of like pruning rather than
damn you, Courtney. I was literally about to say that.
I got it.
Damn you. You literally cut me off by the fucking syllable. Damn you, Courtney. Okay. All right. So we've got the conflict, we've got the antagonist, we've got everything together. I think that the story that we see is literally just like a travel story that sets up the world, that conveys the setting and all that good stuff. I feel like we've nailed the major elements, and I think we're good here, right?
I think so, yeah. I think it's a really cool world to explore.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Daniel, anything else that you wanted to add or have any questions about?
How big are the shark people again?
Oh yeah, I guess we
that's a
never
good
went back to
question.
the sharks.
You know what? I haven't rolled a die this episode. I'm going to roll a die, see how big it is.
Are they just like shark-sized, super shark, Godzilla
Like
shark?
Megalodon,
Yeah.
maybe?
Yeah, Megalodon.
Let's find out. Let's see what the die says, Daniel.
Okay.
All right, so that's a 5. So I'm going to say, considering that's very much on the low end for a D20, they're going to be like human shaped or human sized, rather.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Makes sense.
Again, please, listeners, send in your weird AI, or if you're an artist yourself, send in your own weird, like sub ocean depth, like weirdo aquatic human hybrid, please. That'd be really cool to see. And you know where you can share those deep sea monstrosities? You can go to our Discord and drop them anywhere in the world building tab, maybe the general. I'm not really terribly picky. Just let us know and we can talk to y'all about that. By the way, a huge thank you to Commissar Whiskers for suggesting this topic. I hope that it was to your liking. And again, a thank you to our newest patrons, Carson and Alexander, for joining us. Huge respect, huge love for you. We really appreciate it. Remember, of course, that if you want us to build your world, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com. Click the link, follow the instructions, and within a reasonable amount of time, we'll be building your world. If you want to follow us on social media, go to Twitter at Let's World Build. That's where we are. The Discord that I was talking about previously, there's a link for that in the description of this very episode or on our website. And like Alexander and Carson, you want to become a patron because you're just so generous, you can go to our Patreon with a link for that in the description as well, where you can get patron-only episodes. You can get priority on all sorts of good stuff. Just go read it. There's so many cool things that you can get by joining our Patreon. That's going to do it for this episode of World Build with Us. Remember that we love you very much, and we're going to get through this together. Until next week.